Hello, lovely people. Ellie here, just popping in to say thank you so much for all your support on the first season of Help Me I'm Poor. And we really hope you love our final episode this season. It's a brilliant one. And just a quick note that the content that will be discussed in the episode is intended for information and educational purposes only and shouldn't be considered investment advice or investment recommendations. We hope you enjoy it.
Hello and welcome to Help Me I'm Poor, the money podcast that's more quaalude than quantitative easing. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ellie, and each week we discuss how money shows up in our favourite pop culture, from the classic to the nostalgic to the contemporary. If you enjoy the podcast, then please do follow, subscribe, rate, review. It means so much to us, especially as a new show. We really do appreciate all of your feedback. So also drop us a message at Help Me I'm Podcast if you've got any requests for us to cover in the future.
Okay, so without further ado, this is a special bonus episode with our partners, eToro. We are going to introduce you to a very special guest in a moment. But first, we want to tell you what we're going to be talking about today. This is a really interesting one. Apart from anything else, I think everything that we have discussed so far, are things that I like. And this film, although it's a Scorsese film, obviously it's good, it's really brilliantly made. But I didn't enjoy my rewatch of it, and I don't remember particularly enjoying it the first time I saw it, partly for reasons that we're going to go into.
Yeah.
We are talking, of course, about The Wolf of Wall Street. So The Wolf of Wall Street, 2013 film directed by Martin Scorsese. It's based on a memoir, so it is biographical. It's kind of a dark comedy. I don't find it that funny, to be honest. But it has a certain sort of humour. It's got a lot of kind of Jonah Hill running around on drugs or, snorting cocaine off someone's bum.
Do you know what? I think it's one of those films that, I hate to say it, but I feel like men probably find funnier.
I do think that most people who enjoy that film are likely to be men.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's about sort of excess, greed. It's about the rise and fall of Jordan Belfort, who is a corrupt stockbroker. And we see in the film that he doesn't start off that way. He starts really legit. He is young and really ambitious, but he starts at a reputable stock brokerage on Wall Street. In the film, it's the day before the 1987 stock market crash. So he loses his job instantly. But then he finds this niche selling penny stocks, rubbish stocks, basically, to gullible investors, but for really high commissions. And then he very quickly founds his own firm, Stratton Oakmont, and they use really aggressive sales tactics. And he doesn't choose finance guys. He chooses sales people to come and work for him, and just really ruthless people who are going to buy into this sort of pump and dump strategy. He quickly amasses huge amounts of wealth. He has a wife from kind of his previous life, and she sort of acts a little bit as his moral compass, not loads, but she's sort of clearly a bit
reminder.
Uncomfortable. Who, again, she's played by Kristen Milioti, who's one of the most beautiful women in the world, but she is quickly discarded in favour of Margot Robbie's Naomi, the Duchess. So as he amasses more money, he becomes way more reckless, both in his dealings at work, but also in his use of drugs, in his the antics in the office. The way that it's depicted is absolutely crazy. It's just sort of hedonism, exploitation, can we even call it infidelity? It's so extreme. But yeah, the film kind of goes into that. I would say that it gives quite an uncritical view of all of that.
Yeah, I think the thing is, it really makes it seem hilarious and fun, and it doesn't really look at it as being that problematic.
No, and I think obviously they could say that they're leaving the viewer to draw their own conclusions, and I don't think that anyone's looking at that kind of behaviour and thinking this is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
But equally it is made to seem kind of a bit of fun. So we kind of follow his rise. He never seems particularly happy, even when he's having a great time. He's always completely like off his tits.
Yeah.
But he becomes really addicted to kind of the power, the money. Like he's obsessed with money. You know, anytime he's trying to get one over on something else, it's always, I'm richer than you, like with the FBI agents. But speaking of FBI agents, we've got this one agent, Patrick Denham. He's quietly investigating their dealings, and that kind of all unravels at the same time as his personal life. And despite a lot of opportunities to get out of it unscathed, he just won't back down. And eventually he's arrested, cooperates with the plea deal and turns everyone in, just like totally ruthless right to the very end. He does go to prison, but then reinvents himself as a motivational speaker, which does seem to be the path for a lot of cancelled men.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's just so like so much of this film. And I think one of the things that I find like quite mad about it is that like when you watch it, you're like, this isn't real. Like, this can't be real. And then actually you step back and you're like, oh no, actually I think this is real. Like, I think this is what happens in real life sometimes.
Oh, we can talk about that in a moment because we have some insights into this. But before we do, I really want to introduce our guest.
Yes.
She has been waiting patiently for us to summarise the plot. She is Sarah Glanville. She is Senior Account Manager at eToro, who has sponsored this season for us with their Loud Investing campaign. So we are really excited to speak to Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me, Ellie and Claire. I'm very excited to be here. I've been at eToro going on 6 years now. Like I said, I'm an account manager here. So I get to chat with the clients daily. You know, we cover everything, whether it be about the markets or their portfolio, their appetite to risk or risk management, and also all things platform. And I'm very excited to be here with you today.
Amazing. Well, yeah, because I mean, Ellie and I, although we work in this space, we're not from financial services backgrounds. So you can give us a real insight that we don't have. So this is amazing. Not to mention all of the work that you've been doing at eToro to kind of push women into this narrative in a way that they deserve. Because as we can see in this film, I mean, women are pretty much missing. I think there's one female trader in Kimmy who is like really doesn't help to make up for the way that women are depicted in the whole of the rest of this film. So I'd love to know from you kind of why did eToro feel like the depiction of women on screen in films like The Wolf of Wall Street, in TV shows like Industry, was worth looking at?
I think there's a few reasons. When I think of just TV shows and films in general, they reflect reality in a certain way. And I also think when you're looking at different career paths or even just trying to see yourself in a character or as a role model, really, if you're not seeing yourself as for example, female investors, they're not really shown. And like you said, Wolf of Wall Street is very much alpha male intense. It may make you think, well, if I don't see myself in any of those characters, maybe I don't belong in that space, which I don't think is entirely accurate. So I think eToro, we looked at, well, essentially there's a massive gender investment gap, and we looked at maybe how can we close that gap? And one of the reasons was, you know, what do we see on screen? What are the role models out there? So it was really interesting. And there were some interesting statistics that came back when you start actually breaking down these films and looking at the characters. And like you said, I think there's one female trader in Wolf of Wall Street, and then everyone else was wives, assistants, mistresses, the lovely Margot Robbie, of course.
Yeah. And I think it is something that I have definitely noticed as I've been working in this space, that there really aren't that many women that we do see when we look around in these positions. But there have been a few examples. And I mean, Claire just mentioned there that there are starting to be a few more. So Industry being one example. And have you noticed whilst, you know, compiling this report and doing the work that there has seemed to be a shift, or is it still predominantly that we're seeing women as these kind of peripheral characters? I think in more recent years, it is starting to shift a little bit. The report was only based on the last, I believe, 16 years. So we didn't go too far back. But I think a lot of it was still stuck with traditional values or maybe traditional social norms, where, men were the investors, men made the money, and women were more of the side characters, which is, of course, not really the case in reality in general. So yeah, there's definitely been a shift. And I think I did watch Industry too. And it was interesting because the women that they normally show as investors now have the same characteristics as those alphas.
Yes.
So tend to be really confident, outspoken, which aren't bad traits to have, of course.
But they are quite, I guess, masculine traits.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So they do tend to be more on the masculine side. And maybe if you're more feminine, you're still not relating to those characters that much.
Yeah, and this is something that does come up in the report. So it says equating women's successful finance careers with the need to adopt alpha characteristics and still be discriminated against is restrictive and disappointing. And I really loved that was included because it's something that I've thought about quite a lot. Like, I'm quite a soft person, and I'm still really ambitious. I want to be really successful, but I've got quite like a soft voice. I've got quite a soft demeanor. And I think for me, I never would have seen myself even in those depictions of the women in those roles on TV and in these dramatized versions of things, because I'm aware of my like softness. And one of the things that it's really like rife across different media. So even films like The Devil Wears Prada, you've got Miranda Priestley. It's a lot of ice queens, Dragon's Den, The Chase, even like the women have to be these stern like ice queens. But then recently, and I hope that one day we'll do an episode on The Bear because it is one of my favorite TV shows. But there's a character in that played by Olivia Colman, and she is the head chef of a really like prestigious restaurant. And she is so clearly a leader, but she is soft and she is quietly spoken and she is calm. And there's no alpha, like you can tell that she's in charge, but there's no alpha energy about her. And she is kind of in touch with like her emotional side. She has an emotional reason when she closes the restaurant eventually. And I loved to see that depiction of someone who was a leader, but who could have that like feminine softness.
Definitely. I think it's more relatable. And I think a lot of women in general would relate to that. And when you see films like Wolf of Wall Street and they're going absolutely nuts and, they've got crazy parties and they've got strippers and whatnot, a lot of women would say, I can't relate to that. That's not me. I'm not going to these crazy events and that's not how I view investing.
Oh, that I wouldn't want to. Like, I wouldn't want to exist in that environment.
No, definitely. And I don't think it's really that accurate representation nowadays. Of course, I think, eToro, we're very inclusive. I'm not necessarily an overly confident or loud person. I'm not very risk-taking in terms of what I invest in. I prefer to play it safe more than anything. But yeah, these films, I don't think that's really represented that often.
Yeah, it's all very high stakes and risk. I mean, the risky behavior extends way beyond the financial stuff. But Ellie and I, before in like our prep, came across an article from 2013 for Time magazine, which was a kind of a comment on the film when it was released. And it's called What the Wolf of Wall Street is Missing, The Women. And the stand first is, ask any woman who worked around finance in the movies era what she thought about sexual harassment, and her answer will likely be a shrug. We just called it going to work. But there were some really great pull quotes from this article. So she was a financial journalist, the woman who wrote this. She says, as a rookie reporter at the Wall Street Journal in the 1980s, while working on one of my first articles, the businessman I was interviewing locked his office door, leered at me, and stripped down to his underwear. Alarmed but not knowing what to do, I kept asking my questions, jotting notes in my reporter's pad. Then I escaped as fast as I could. And that experience is quite aligned with what we see in the film. Like, you could imagine that being a scene from The Wolf of Wall Street.
It is terrifying. But I think what I found so striking about this article is that she talks about
the fact that her and her flatmate, who also worked in finance at the same time, they didn't go home and discuss this because it was just normal. She actually says, like, we, a few years later, were discussing, like, why did we never mention this to each other? And their conclusion was because it was just part of the job and the day to day. And so when you kind of hear that from a first-hand experience, I think you then can see the film in a bit more context and be like, oh, actually, maybe they're not exaggerating as much as it looks like they are exaggerating.
Yeah, exactly. I think Jordan, he's on TikTok as well, isn't he? Jordan Belfort?
I can totally imagine that.
Yeah, and his personality kind of like matches what Leonardo DiCaprio's depiction of that, or his adaptation of that. And apparently he shadowed him for months to get the right gist. And you can kind of imagine, and hearing stories like that, you think, I mean, we couldn't imagine that in this day and age, really. No. And that would be a lawsuit and whatever else to come. But it's crazy when you reflect on, you know, how things used to be.
Okay, I've got a quick question for you. When you picture somebody that invests, who do you picture?
Be honest, was it a man in a suit? A Jordan Belfort type? Navy gilet on his days off, maybe?
Exactly. And that's the issue that I want to talk about. Because for too long, the world of investing has felt like it's been built for people like them, not for women like us.
Which is why we're so excited that Help Me I'm Poor is partnering with eToro on their Loud Investing initiative. It's all about raising our voices and making sure that other women see that investing is for us too.
Loud Investing was born from a simple idea. If women don't see themselves in the investing space, then they're way less likely to feel like it's something that they should or can do.
Think about it. In finance films or shows, women are usually the wives, the secretaries, the girlfriends. The men are the ones making the big money moves.
And outside finance, we're often painted as the spenders, the ones who are racking up the credit card bills. Confessions of a shopaholic, anyone?
Exactly. But it's time to flip the script because women do invest and we're good at it.
So let's talk about it. Let's be loud about it. Let's show other women from all walks of life that you don't need a finance degree or a pinstripe suit to take control of your money.
Get behind the movement. Let's make investing more visible, more inclusive, and way less Navy gilet.
Thank you so much to eToro for being our partner on Help Me I'm Poor. To find out more, head to the link in the show notes and join us in raising our voices and investing loudly.
And just a quick heads up, all content on Help Me I'm Poor is for information and educational purposes only. It should not be taken as investment or financial advice, personal recommendations, or an offer of any kind. Always do your own research.
eToro is a multi-asset investment platform. The value of your investments may go up or down. With investing, your capital is at risk. I do have question marks about whether basically it does still happen a lot. We just don't see it as much. And whether, again, we think that things have got a lot better, but they haven't necessarily. And actually whether people are just better at kind of covering their tracks nowadays and it's more subtle. And I think, it only takes kind of a little bit of digging behind the scenes of like what goes on in banking still today in some of the big institutions to kind of figure out like that there's a lot of issues still around harassment, behavior towards women in particular. I think, hopefully there's been a lot more access and there are a lot more paths for women to rise up in these careers. But I guess I just have I have a suspicion / based on like what I've heard that it still is quite bad.
I think in general, if you walked around Bank or Canary Wharf, you do get a sea of these Navy gilets and it's intimidating and it ends up looking very much like a man's club. And I'm sure, in general, there is a lot of work to do with, women in finance and pushing women up. There's so many good projects on at the moment. Yeah. There's good initiatives and drives for women in finance. There's societies about it. And even at eToro, we've got our Loud Investing campaign, which is promoting women to be investors as well and showing them how they can do it and be their own role model and the first steps you need to take to try and take away that narrative a lot. I guess a lot of it is perception, right? And I remember when I first started my finance degree, walking into my first ever lecture, it was a sea of men again, and it was overwhelming and it was intimidating because I didn't really comprehend that it would still be that case when I started 10, 11 years ago.
What was it that made you choose to do finance in the first place?
It was an interesting one. I always liked maths. I know it's not as popular of opinion, but I liked maths because I liked the yes and no of it and definitive answer of it. So I was kind of thinking, where could I do maths? I'm a bit of a chatter. So I was like, I want some sort of social role. And I always wanted to work in a fintech because I had a friend who worked at Facebook, and I used to think that's so cool. And they would have, free coffees and nice breakfasts and all of that. So that I guess at that age when I was 16, 17, deciding what uni to do or what course to do, I just thought, well, finance, that sounds quite fun. I'll give that a go. But yeah, it was overwhelming the first few times I got there. And I thought even in group projects, having what we would now call as mansplaining, or maybe my opinion not taken as seriously when you're in a group with 7 other men and somewhat acting like a little boys club to get involved in.
I mean, in my house on campus, when I started university in 2009, there were 9 of us. 4 of the boys, I'll call them boys, they were only 18. 4 of the boys were economics students, and it was remarkable as in it was something to be remarked on when there was a girl in their seminar group.
Really?
It was so heavily skewed towards the boys, basically. And I mean, I didn't notice any of that sexism or mansplaining from them. I think they were all always really keen to work with the girls or the young women who were in their group and stuff like that. But it was, the ratios were really off. And I think even I'm thinking about the trading game, Gary Stevenson's sort of memoir, and it's such a brilliant book. But even in that, he's so progressive, but he's reporting what actually happened. All of his colleagues and all of the important roles are men, and the only women in it are his girlfriends and a waitress at a cafe. So I think...
But then is it a surprise in a way if actually when we look back at, even when you're looking at really young girls and boys, there's been some work done, and I think there was a report on the fact that even from a young age, there's a split in terms of how boys and girls are talked to about finance and about money. So is it actually a surprise that we see more girls go to other subjects and go down a more humanities route rather than going to science and maths? And then naturally, the consequence of that is that when we get to degree level, the same thing happens because there's way fewer women that are doing the subjects at A level that you need to then go and do maths or finance or economics. And then that just filters into the job. So really, it makes me kind of think what we actually need to do if we want to change the industry is we need to start right at the beginning and at school age.
No, definitely. And I think society shapes you in loads of different ways that you probably subconsciously a lot as well. And mentioning films like Confessions of a Shopaholic kind of shows that, women maybe aren't the best at keeping money, safe and secure, or investing money, and they're more big spenders and can't control their shopping. And I mean, I definitely have fallen victim to that once or twice.
Yeah, we all have.
But I'm sure subconsciously you take a lot of it in. Yeah. So yeah, I'd be intrigued to know what the options right from day one would be, and whether it be, at a very young age, showing images of kids, women investing too, or if there was more content out there with female investors, would that, have a subtle effect on what people want to do when they grow up?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think as well, I've seen a few people have done that whole show me an investor on ChatGPT, for example, and it comes back with a man in a suit, and it's how do we change that? Because all of those signs you see from such a young age are really kind of putting investors into that one bucket of your Jordan Belfort, of your man in the suit in Canary Wharf. How do we shift that so that the next generation do see more representation and see more women as investors, and then they can aspire to be like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's why it's so important to have role models in the space. And like I was saying earlier, I think if you don't see yourself portrayed in a space, you don't think you belong in that space, which I don't think is, right. And then, of course, with investing, I think that has had effect. And this is why we have such a large gender investment gap in the UK. So we're at eToro, we're running this loud investing initiative, which basically is making females role models, or just having conversations and being loud about that you invest as a woman, and showing your friends, your family, your colleagues. I realized actually when this report was written that I actually haven't spoken to my friends that often about investing. I've maybe mentioned it once or twice, and I've been working at eToro for nearly 6 years.
Wow.
So I ran a little seminar with them, and I was intrigued to know what their mental blocks were around it.
Yeah.
And I think it changes when we can have conversations just casually, because I think men do a lot. They talk about their stocks and what they're looking at investing, or their interest rates they're getting here and there. I don't think me and my friends necessarily had that conversation often before.
I remember a report that was done a couple of years ago that was around the messaging that was in kind of like men's media versus women's media. And in women's, it was about like curbing your spending and saving. And in men's media, it was so much more about investing and growth. And I think that, when we're being fed these two like very divergent messages, it's no wonder that our approach to it is different. So yeah, just like trying to pump women's media with these messages about the fact that we can invest, I think is really important. I mean, I remember like a very old episode of Sex and the City where Miranda, who is like a corporate lawyer and obviously earning a lot, and she's really ambitious. She buys an apartment by herself, like all of this stuff. But she says that she doesn't mess with the stock market because it's too risky. And I wonder, is that something that you come up against sometimes? Is it like an aversion to risk?
Yes, I think, going back to that conversation I had with my friends, a lot of them said, I'm scared of losing my money. And I think that is a very valid concern to have. But I think the risk level you see in films is way beyond personally what I would want to risk. And there are safer options. There's things like ETFs, for example, where it's a collection of loads of stocks. So you're not reliant on just one particular thing. Or you go for bonds, which are, very low risk, fixed rates as well. There's a variety of different options really available. And I think the perception of risk is elevated so much due to the media that we see around investing and like Wolf of Wall Street.
And do you think there's actually a way that we can bridge that in terms of like the depiction that we see of investing? Because I do think, I guess, there's a fundamental clash, or like, I don't know how you fit in like the entertainment and the need for entertainment, which drives so much of what we see on screen, which in turn does involve like the risk and the high stakes, with actually like the reality and the fact that you can invest in a much more calm, low risk, more long-term way. And it's something that I've been trying to figure out in my head for a while. Like, how do we increase that perception? Because ultimately, if we just create a Wolf of Wall Street but put a woman as Jordan, like that's not actually making much difference, is it, in terms of like that representation and relatability? Like, we've still got to figure out how do we make those characters feel relatable and something that we could actually see ourselves in.
Yeah, I understand that. And I think, it might make for quite boring TV, realistically, if it's just me just writing down a few notes on the lowest risk strategy you could possibly do. I guess it's just normalizing it more.
Absolutely.
Maybe. And even just on smaller scale, just instead of, media in general, just having conversations. And maybe if growing up, I saw my mum investing at a younger age, I would have thought it was more normal.
I think one thing as well that stands out to me when I watch The Wolf of Wall Street is that investing sometimes feels a little bit like it's only for people with huge amounts of money. But I guess in the last 10, 20 years or so, that's maybe changed a lot with the development and emergence of platforms like eToro. And is it the case that actually now we can start investing without having hundreds of thousands in the bank?
Yes. I mean, in this day and age, one of the benefits is that platforms like eToro are very accessible and they are created for everyone. So you could invest $10 a month, for example. It doesn't have to, I know those shows really show hundreds and thousands and They're rolling in. When I first started investing, it was £20 a month. So it isn't a game just for the very wealthy. It's very accessible for the reason of it's for everyone.
And I guess that ties into the risk as well, because I think, if you're thinking, I have to invest thousands, then the risk is proportionate. So you feel like I'm going to lose thousands. But actually, if you can afford to invest £10-20 a month, then actually a fluctuation hopefully then isn't going to really scare you and stress you out if if your investments drop by 5% one week. If it's only of £20, then you're not going to feel as much stress as if it was like tens of thousands.
Yeah, definitely. And I think definitely if you're starting investing, I would even say using smaller amounts to begin with probably puts your mind at ease a little bit. It builds the habit, but you're not risking your complete financial future if it's, £10, £20, £50 a month, really.
Yeah, and I think we would always kind of say to people that it might be a good idea to consider having like a cash emergency fund as well, so that, you're not reliant on your investment savings in case of an emergency, just in case there is a fluctuation in the stock market. But I think there is a perception still that an investor is someone who has like a financial advisor or has sort of a wealth manager or whatever, and has like tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds in assets under management. And that's just not the case anymore.
I know in those films, and maybe 50 years ago that may have been the case, but now with very accessible platforms, it's actually what you tend to see is they're created for the retail investor. So for the everyday person, there is such a variety of investors at eToro, ranging from 18-year-olds who are just building a habit all the way up to 70-year-olds, who are investing in something new. So you do get such a large variety of clients on my side.
We would really love to hear from you kind of what the solid benefits are of closing the gender investment gap. A, for women, but B, just for like the industry and the world at large, because there are some really interesting stats around how like good women can be as investors and the like good that they can do when money's in their hands.
Yes, so there's been a few studies recently basically looking at the difference between what men invest and what women invest. And at the moment in the UK, it stands at £678 billion between the difference between men and women and what they're investing. It's a big figure, isn't it? It's astonishing, really.
Gosh.
I think the main reason why you'd want to bridge that gap is I think it just makes for a more inclusive society. For women in particular, investing can be a vital tool to hit financial goals. It's all about growing your wealth, but of course in a way that you would like it. My mum, when I was 18, my mum and dad got divorced. My mum had no idea about investing. We learned very quickly on how to do it, and we looked up tutorials. I think we used YouTube at the time. There's much better resources these days. eToro even has an academy where it's dedicated to this. But because she learned to invest, very low risk, very simple. She is not a maths girl at all. I did not want to overwhelm her. She can barely get emails together these days, but she's in such a stronger position. And what I really did notice the most was the independence it gave her and the confidence, the security as well, to know that you've got your own money and you can take care of yourself if needs be. Because before that, my dad took care of all things financial, and it was very scary for her at the first. So I think it is so important for women to know how to grow their money, really, to hit those financial goals and set up security for them and their family too.
And did she have any reluctance around that level of risk, having come from not really being in charge of the finances before? And how did you kind of tackle that with her?
Yes. So it was massive for her, because she really didn't want, she heard the word stock market and thought, it could crash, I could lose everything. And I think those trigger words, she's not into finance at all. So she was definitely reluctant at first. So what I did, showed her some stats, showed her how long do you want to hold it,
Yeah.
You know, S&P 500, for example, if you've held 20 years, no one's ever lost money. I go, if you're looking, this is your pension money, over on average for the last 40 years, it returns 10%. Of course, there are crashes. It does go up and down. Short term is going to be more risky if you're only holding it there for a year. But if it's long term, the stats are on your side. Of course, you know, past performance is never an indicator of future results, just to cover myself there.
Disclaimer.
Quick disclaimer. But yeah, she was very reluctant to begin with. But I think we're looking at the research and the numbers behind it. It did grow her confidence, and now she can look at low risk items. She's not going to be going all into Bitcoin anytime soon or anything along those lines, but she's comfortable with the risk she's taking, because she's got such a big time horizon as well.
I think that's one of the things that's so important is like when we're talking about pensions, especially, you've got a really long time until retirement. And so if we're thinking, you know, that 10 plus years, the other factor I think we often can overlook is that, you know, we've got inflation and savings interest rates are not great still. I mean, they've come back down again. I always notice as soon as we get a change from the Bank of England, within minutes, my savings interest rates drop. They don't hang around, do they? And so actually, like, knowing how to grow your wealth over the long time and not just relying on those like meager savings interest rates is so empowering.
I agree. And I think it's a lot of habit building as well.
Yeah.
And I think that what really changed after uni when I started, well, I think it was 20 quid a month I started with. And it was a habit and it was building that habit. So even though over the year, what did I make? 240 quid? And maybe it went up 20 quid.
Yeah.
You know, when we got 10% rise or so. It was a habit that I built. And that's now, every time I get paid, I'm instantly investing a proportion of my salary away. And I've built that habit. And I think that's such an important skill to have. It just means you've got a little nest egg, and compound interest can be a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I think Einstein may have said it's one of the 8 wonders of the world. I'm not sure, not confirming.
I think Einstein is having a lot of quotes attributed to him that weren't necessarily, I'm sure he's fine to
I'll take it if not. I'll take it if not.
What I really love though is that your first like example that you, before you talked about your own investing journey, you were talking about your mum, because I think so many women who are maybe in their like 40s, 50s think that it's too late for them. And, you know, it's great to see narratives of young women starting to invest really early, taking advantage of that time in the market. But I really love hearing stories of women starting to feel empowered and starting to invest when they're slightly older as well. Because I just love this narrative of like never too early, never too late. And so, yeah, I love that for your mum.
No, 100%. I mean, I think, don't shoot me, mum, but I think she was about 52 or so. But my clients that I have at eToro, variety of ages, you're never too late. And I hate the thought that someone might get to 50 or 60 and think, well, I just can't get involved now, because that's not the case. Maybe you don't want to take on as much risk because maybe you don't want to hold it there for 20 plus years, but you still have an option there and it's still available to you. And it's not too late. The first step is always going to be the scariest step.
Yeah.
And a lot of platforms like eToro, very accessible, and we have virtual accounts. So you can practice for a bit with virtual money, not risk any of your money. And I think it gives that reassurance to what it's like and how it's going to play out.
Yeah. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there with like that first step is the hardest. And when we speak to a lot of our listeners, our audience, that is the bit that people really get stuck on that first step. So I know with Loud Investing, with the initiative, you're really trying to open up the conversation and encourage people. And you mentioned the eToro Academy. So where can people find out more information if they do want to know how to start and get that, I guess, confidence to really take that first step? And what is there for them?
Yeah, there's a few options. So I am lucky enough to work for eToro, and we have a whole academy of resources. So webinars, guides, we have podcasts. At eToro, we believe that education should always be free. So all the courses, all the webinars, they're completely free. If you wanted something a little bit more in depth, there's technical analysis, but just for a beginner guide, there's so many options there. You could even Google eToro Academy, it's there.
We will link in the show notes.
Yes,
Lovely,
in the show
lovely.
notes, because I think there are quite a lot of courses out there being put out there by, creators or people who do really know that their stuff, but they cost money. You also need to do your research to see if the people who are creating these courses really know their stuff. Whereas I think it's really helpful for people to know that there is this absolute wealth of like incredibly well researched, really well backed information and education that they can get a hold of for free.
Yeah, exactly. And when I speak to, some potential clients or just people at events, that's usually their first question is, how do I learn? I don't know anything about the stock market. And I completely understand. I think no one knows when they start. It's a learning process, but it is, having those resources where they mimic what it's going to look like is so important. And in addition to that, I think the virtual account is so important for that reason too, because you don't have to risk your own capital. You can play around with it for a few months, see what it's like investing, practice strategies even, get used to opening and closing a trade.
It's very clever.
Yes, I use it. My virtual account's doing 10 times better than my real account though. So.
I guess you're taking more risk with your virtual account.
Yeah, probably.
That is so brilliant. We will link to both of those resources in the show notes. And is there anything else that you would say to a listener who's curious about getting started with investing, who wants to kind of join the Loud Investing campaign or start investing for themselves?
Yes. So I would reiterate that I completely understand the first step is the scariest step. Like I said, there's a lot of resources out there, but even with our Loud Investing campaign, eToro has been posting on our socials very often with updates and tips of where to find guides and courses that you might find useful too. So there is a lot of options out there for you. Of course, feel free to get in contact with us directly if you do have any questions or queries about it. We're more than happy to help there. And yeah, with the Loud Investing, I think, it's so important to have those conversations, open up. You don't know how much you can help, not just yourself, but other people's financial future. And the conversations I had with my mum when I was 18 completely changed her outlook with finances and her confidence as well and independence. So I think it's, very vital. It's something I'm passionate about. So I think, have a conversation with your sister, your mum, your friend, daughter, anyone, grandma, who knows?
That is amazing. So basically what we're sort of saying is ignore the Wolf of Wall Street as much as possible. It's not a good representation of the kind of investing that we want women to get involved in. But also, no matter kind of how you approach things, whether you are like a more alpha personality or whether you prefer to approach things in a softer way, there is space for you. If you're a young woman wanting to work in finance, there's space for you there. There's huge potential for you there. But also, if you're a woman wanting to invest and help us to close that gender investing gap, there are loads of resources out there for you to get involved.
Yes, definitely. Investing is for everyone. It's not just for finance bros in Canary Wharf and Gilets. And I would like to reiterate that. But yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there.
Amazing.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us. It has been so wonderful to chat to you. It's all we've got time for, unless there's anything else that you wanted to add, Ellie.
No, I think we will, as we said, we'll put all of the links into the show notes and there'll be loads of information that you can get there if you want to find out more about how to start with eToro. But thank you so much for listening. We hope you have really enjoyed this episode with our special guest, Sarah. We have loved chatting to you. And if you have enjoyed it, if you love the podcast, rate, review, subscribe, drop us a message at Help Me I'm Podcast, and we will see you next week. Bye.